question 5 of goodness in general. Prologue. We next consider goodness. First, goodness in general. Secondly, the goodness of God. Under the first head, there are 6 points of inquiry. 1. Whether goodness and being are the same really. 2. Granted that they differ only in idea, which is prior in thought. 3. Granted that being is prior, whether every being is good. 4. To what cause should goodness be reduced? 5. Whether goodness consists in mode, species, and order. 6. Whether goodness is divided into the virtuous, the useful, and the pleasant. Article 1. Whether goodness differs really from being. Objection 1. It seems that goodness differs really from being. For Boethius says, the Hedam, I perceive that in nature the fact that things are good is one thing, that they are is another. Therefore, goodness and being really differ. Objection 2. Further, nothing can be its own form, but that is called good which has the form of being, according to the commentary on De Causis. Therefore, goodness differs really from being. Objection 3. Further, goodness can be more or less, but being cannot be more or less. Therefore, goodness differs really from being. On the contrary, Augustine says, De Doctr. Christ 1:42, that inasmuch as we exist, we are good. I answer that goodness and being are really the same, and differ only in idea, which is clear from the following argument. The essence of goodness consists in this, that it is in some way desirable. Hence the philosopher says, Ethic 1, goodness is what all desire. Now, it is clear that a thing is desirable only insofar as it is perfect. For all desire their own perfection, but everything is perfect so far as it is actual. Therefore, it is clear that a thing is perfect so far as it exists, for it is existence that makes all things actual, as is clear from the foregoing. Question 3, Article 4. Question 4, Article 1. Hence, it is clear that goodness and being are the same really, but goodness presents the aspect of desirableness, which being does not present. Reply to Objection 1. Although goodness and being are the same really, nevertheless, since they differ in thought, they are not predicated of a thing absolutely in the same way, since being properly signifies that something actually is, and actuality properly correlates to potentiality. A thing is, in consequence, said simply to have being, according as it is primarily distinguished from that which is only in potentiality, and this is precisely each thing's substantial being. Hence, by its substantial being, everything is said to have being simply, but by any further actuality it is said to have being relatively. Thus, to be white implies relative being, for to be white does not make a thing out of simply potential being, because only a thing that actually has being can receive this mode of being. But goodness signifies perfection, which is desirable, and consequently of ultimate perfection. Hence, that which has ultimate perfection is said to be simply good, but that which has not the ultimate perfection it ought to have, although insofar as it is at all actual it has some perfection. It is not said to be perfect simply nor good simply, but only relatively. In this way, therefore, viewed in its primal, that is, substantial being, a thing is said to be simply, and to be good relatively, that is, insofar as it has being, but viewed in its complete actuality. A thing is said to be relatively, and to be good simply. Hence the saying of Boethius de Hebron, I perceive that in nature the fact that things are good is one thing, that they are is another, is to be referred to a thing's goodness simply and having being simply, because regarded in its primal actuality, a thing simply exists, and regarded in its complete actuality, it is good simply, in such sort that even in its primal actuality, it is in some sort good, and even in its complete actuality, it in some sort has being. Reply to Objection 2. Goodness is a form so far as absolute goodness signifies complete actuality. Reply to Objection 3. Again, Goodness is spoken of as more or less according to a thing's superadded actuality, for example, as to knowledge or virtue. Article 2. Whether goodness is prior in idea to being. Objection 1. It seems that goodness is prior in idea to being, for names are arranged according to the arrangement of the things signified by the names. But Dionysius, Div. Nom. 3, assigned the first place, amongst the other names of God, to his goodness rather than to his being. Therefore in idea goodness is prior to being. Objection 2. Further, that which is more extensive is prior in idea, but goodness is more extensive than being, because, as Dionysius notes, Div. Nom. 5, goodness extends to things both existing and non-existing, whereas existence extends to existing things alone. Therefore goodness is in idea prior to being. Objection 3. Further, what is the more universal is prior in idea, but goodness seems to be more universal than being, since goodness has the aspect of desirable, whereas to some non-existence is desirable. For it is said of Judas, "It were better for him if that man had not been born." Matthew 26:24. Therefore in idea goodness is prior to being. Objection 4. Further, not only is existence desirable, but life, knowledge, and many other things besides. Thus it seems that existence is a particular appetible, and goodness a universal appetible. Therefore absolutely goodness is prior in idea to being. On the contrary, it is said by Aristotle, De Causis, that the first of created things is being. I answer that, in idea being is prior to goodness. For the meaning signified by the name of a thing is that which the mind conceives of the thing and intends by the word that stands for it. Therefore, that is prior in idea, which is first conceived by the intellect. Now the first thing conceived by the intellect is being, because everything is knowable only inasmuch as it is in actuality. Hence, being is the proper object of the intellect, and is primarily intelligible. As sound is that which is primarily audible, therefore in idea, being is prior to goodness. Reply to Objection 1. Dionysius discusses the divine names, Div. Nom. 1:3, as implying some causal relation in God. For we name God, as he says, from creatures as a cause from its effect, but goodness, since it has the aspect of desirable, implies the idea of a final cause, the causality of which is first among causes, since an agent does not act except for some end, and by an agent matter is moved to its form. Hence the end is called the cause of causes. Thus goodness as a cause is prior to being, as is the end to the form. Therefore among the names signifying the divine causality, goodness precedes being. Again, according to the Platonists, who, through not distinguishing primary matter from privation, said that matter was non-being, goodness is more extensively participated than being, for primary matter participates in goodness as tending to it, for all seek their like, but it does not participate in being, since it is presumed to be non-being. Therefore Dionysius says that goodness extends to non-existence. Div. Nom. 5. Reply to Objection 2. The same solution is applied to this objection, or it may be said that goodness extends to existing and non-existing things, not so far as it can be predicated of them, but so far as it can cause them. If, indeed, by non-existence we understand not simply those things which do not exist, but those which are potential and not actual, for goodness has the aspect of the end, in which not only actual things find their completion, but also towards which tend even those things which are not actual but merely potential. Now being implies the habitude of a formal cause only, either inherent or exemplar, and its causality does not extend save to those things which are actual. Reply to Objection 3. Non-being is desirable, not of itself, but only relatively, that is, inasmuch as the removal of an evil, which can only be removed by non-being, is desirable. Now the removal of an evil cannot be desirable, except so far as this evil deprives a thing of some being. Therefore being is desirable of itself, and non-being only relatively, inasmuch as one seeks some mode of being of which one cannot bear to be deprived. Thus even non-being can be spoken of as relatively good. Reply to Objection 4. Life, wisdom, and the like are desirable only so far as they are actual. Hence in each one of them, some sort of being is desired, and thus nothing can be desired except being, and consequently nothing is good except being. Article 3. Whether every being is good. Objection 1. It seems that not every being is good, for goodness is something superadded to being, as is clear from Article 1. But whatever is added to being limits it, as substance, quantity, quality, etc. Therefore goodness limits a being. Therefore not every being is good. Objection 2. Further, no evil is good. Woe to you that call evil good and good evil, is Isaiah 5:20. But some things are called evil, therefore not every being is good. Objection 3. Further, goodness implies desirability. Now primary matter does not imply desirability, but rather that which desires. Therefore, primary matter does not contain the formality of goodness. Therefore not every being is good. Objection 4. Further, the philosopher notes, Metaphysics 3, that in mathematics goodness does not exist, but mathematics are entities, otherwise there would be no science of mathematics. Therefore, not every being is good. On the contrary, every being that is not God is God's creature. Now every creature of God is good, 1 Timothy 4:4, and God is the greatest good. Therefore every being is good. I answer that every being as being is good, for all being as being has actuality and is in some way perfect, since every act implies some sort of perfection, and perfection implies desirability and goodness, as is clear from Article 1. Hence it follows that every being as such is good. Reply to Objection 1. Substance, quantity, quality, and everything included in them limit being by applying it to some essence or nature. Now in this sense, goodness does not add anything to being beyond the aspect of desirability and perfection, which is also proper to being, whatever kind of nature it may be. Hence goodness does not limit being. Reply to Objection 2. No being can be spoken of as evil, formally as being, but only so far as it lacks being. Thus a man is said to be evil because he lacks some virtue, and an eye is said to be evil because it lacks the power to see well. Reply to Objection 3. As primary matter has only potential being, so it is only potentially good. Although, according to the Platonists, primary matter may be said to be a non-being on account of the privation attaching to it, nevertheless, it does participate to a certain extent in goodness, viz., by its relation to, or aptitude for, goodness. Consequently, to be desirable is not its property, but to desire. Reply to Objection 4. Mathematical entities do not subsist as realities, because they would be in some sort good if they subsisted, but they have only logical existence, inasmuch as they are abstracted from motion and matter. Thus, they cannot have the aspect of an end, which itself has the aspect of moving another, nor is it repugnant that there should be in some logical entity neither goodness nor form of goodness, since the idea of being is prior to the idea of goodness, as was said in the preceding article. Article 4. Whether goodness has the aspect of a final cause. Objection 1. It seems that goodness Objection 1. It seems that goodness has not the aspect of a final cause, but rather of the other causes. For, as Dionysius says, Div. Nom. 4, goodness is praised as beauty, but beauty has the aspect of a formal cause. Therefore goodness has the aspect of a formal cause. Objection 2. Further, goodness is self-diffusive, for Dionysius says, Div. Nom. 4, that goodness is that whereby all things subsist and are, but to be self-giving implies the aspect of an efficient cause. Therefore goodness has the aspect of an efficient cause. Objection 3. Further, Augustine says, De Doctri Christ 131, that we exist because God is good, but we owe our existence to God as the efficient cause. Therefore goodness implies the aspect of an efficient cause. On the contrary, the philosopher says, Physics 2, that is to be considered as the end and the good of other things, for the sake of which something is. Therefore goodness has the aspect of a final cause. I answer that, since goodness is that which all things desire, and since this has the aspect of an end, it is clear that goodness implies the aspect of an end. Nevertheless, the idea of goodness presupposes the idea of an efficient cause, and also of a formal cause, for we see that what is first in causing is last in the thing caused. Fire, for example, heats first of all before it reproduces the form of fire, though the heat in the fire follows from its substantial form. Now, in causing, goodness and the end come first, both of which move the agent to act. Secondly, the action of the agent moving to the form. Thirdly, comes the form. Hence, in that which is caused, the converse ought to take place, so that there should be first the form whereby it is a being. Secondly, we consider in its effective power, whereby it is perfect in being. For a thing is perfect when it can reproduce its like, as the philosopher says, Meteor 4. Thirdly, there follows the formality of goodness, which is the basic principle of its perfection. Reply to objection 1. Beauty and goodness in a thing are identical, fundamentally, for they are based upon the same thing, namely the form, and consequently goodness is praised as beauty, but they differ logically, for goodness properly relates to the appetite, goodness being what all things desire, and therefore it has the aspect of an end, the appetite being a kind of movement towards a thing. On the other hand, beauty relates to the cognitive faculty, for beautiful things are those which please when seen. Hence beauty consists in due proportion, for the senses delight in things duly proportionate, as in what is after their own kind, because even sense is a sort of reason, just as is every cognitive faculty. Now since knowledge is by assimilation, and similarity relates to form, beauty properly belongs to the nature of a formal cause. Reply to objection 2. Goodness is described as self-diffusive in the sense that an end is said to move. Reply to objection 3. He who has a will is said to be good, so far as he has a good will, because it is by our will that we employ whatever powers we may have. Hence a man is said to be good, not by his good understanding, but by his good will. Now, the will relates to the end as to its proper object. Thus, the saying, "we exist because God is good," has reference to the final cause. Article 5. Whether the essence of goodness consists in mode, species, and order. Objection 1. It seems that the essence of goodness does not consist in mode, species, and order. For goodness and being differ logically, but mode, species, and order seem to belong to the nature of being. For it is written, "Thou hast ordered all things in measure, and number and weight." Wisdom 11:21. And to these three can be reduced species, mode, and order, as Augustine says, Gen ad lit 4:3. Measure fixes the mode of everything. Number gives it its species, and weight gives it rest and stability. Therefore, the essence of goodness does not consist in mode, species, and order. Objection 2. Further, mode, species, and order are themselves good. Therefore, if the essence of goodness consists in mode, species, and order, then every mode must have its own mode, species, and order. The same would be the case with species and order in endless succession. Objection 3. Further, evil is the privation of mode, species, and order, but evil is not the total absence of goodness. Therefore, the essence of goodness does not consist in mode, species, and order. Objection 4. Further, that wherein consists the essence of goodness cannot be spoken of as evil. Yet we can speak of an evil mode, species, and order. Therefore, the essence of goodness does not consist in mode, species, and order. Objection 5. Further, mode, species, and order are caused by weight, number, and measure, as appears from the quotation from Augustine. But not every good thing has weight, number, and measure, for Ambrose says, Hexam 1:9, "It is of the nature of light not to have been created in number, weight, and measure." Therefore, the essence of goodness does not consist in mode, species, and order. On the contrary, Augustine says, De nat boni 3, "These three mode, species, and order, as common good things, are in everything God has made. Thus where these three abound, the things are very good. Where they are less, the things are less good. Where they do not exist at all, there can be nothing good. But this would not be unless the essence of goodness consisted in them. Therefore the essence of goodness consists in mode, species, and order." I answer that everything is said to be good so far as it is perfect, for in that way only is it desirable, as shown above Articles 1:3. Now a thing is said to be perfect if it lacks nothing, according to the mode of its perfection. But since everything is what it is by its form, and since the form presupposes certain things, and from the form certain things necessarily follow, in order for a thing to be perfect and good it must have a form, together with all that precedes and follows upon that form. Now the form presupposes determination or commensuration of its principles, whether material or efficient, and this is signified by the mode. Hence it is said that the measure marks the mode, but the form itself is signified by the species. For everything is placed in its species by its form. Hence the number is said to give the species. For definitions signifying species are like numbers, according to the philosopher, Metaphysics 10. For as a unit added to, or taken from a number, changes its species, so a difference added to, or taken from a definition, changes its species. Further, upon the form follows an inclination to the end, or to an action, or something of the sort, for everything, insofar as it is in act, acts and tends towards that which is in accordance with its form. And this belongs to way and order. Hence the essence of goodness, so far as it consists in perfection, consists also in mode, species, and order. Reply to Objection 1. These three only follow upon being, so far as it is perfect, and according to this perfection is it good. Reply to Objection 2. Mode, species, and order are said to be good and to be beings, not as though they themselves were subsistences, but because it is through them that other things are both beings and good. Hence they have no need of other things whereby they are good, for they are spoken of as good, not as though formally constituted so by something else, but as formally constituting others good. Thus whiteness is not said to be a being as though it were by anything else, but because by it something else has accidental being, as an object that is white. Reply to Objection 3. Every being is due to some form. Hence, according to every being of a thing is its mode, species, order. Thus a man has a mode, species, and order as he is white, virtuous, learned, and so on, according to everything predicated of him. But evil deprives a thing of some sort of being, as blindness deprives us of that being which is sight. Yet it does not destroy every mode, species, and order, but only such as follow upon the being of sight. Reply to Objection 4. Augustine says, De Nat Boni 23, every mode as mode is good. And the same can be said of species and order, but in evil mode. Species and order are so called as being less than they ought to be, or as not belonging to that which ought to belong. Therefore they are called evil, because they are out of place and incongruous. Reply to Objection 5. The nature of light is spoken of as being without number, weight, and measure, not absolutely, but in a comparison with corporeal things, because the power of light extends to all corporeal things, inasmuch as it is an active quality of the first body that causes change, that is, the heavens. Article 6. Whether goodness is rightly divided into the virtuous, the useful, and the pleasant? Objection 1. It seems that goodness is not rightly divided into the virtuous, the useful, and the pleasant. For goodness is divided by the 10 predicaments, as the philosopher says, Ethic 1. But the virtuous, the useful, and the pleasant can be found under one predicament. Therefore goodness is not rightly divided by them. Objection 2. Further, every division is made by opposites, but these three do not seem to be opposites. For the virtuous is pleasing, and no wickedness is useful, whereas this ought to be the case if the division were made by opposites, for then the virtuous and the useful would be opposed, and Tully speaks of this, De Audiobook 2. Therefore this division is incorrect. Objection 3. Further, where one thing is on account of another, there is only one thing, but the useful is not goodness, except so far as it is pleasing and virtuous. Therefore the useful thought not to divide it against the pleasant and the virtuous. On the contrary, Ambrose makes use of this division of goodness. De Audiobook 1:9. I answer that This division properly concerns human goodness, but if we consider the nature of goodness from a higher and more universal point of view, we shall find that this division properly concerns goodness as such, for everything is good so far as it is desirable, and is a term of the movement of the appetite. The term of whose movement can be seen from a consideration of the movement of a natural body. Now, the movement of a natural body is terminated by the end absolutely, and relatively by the means through which it comes to the end. Now the movement ceases, so a thing is called a term of movement, so far as it terminates any part of that movement. Now the ultimate term of movement can be taken in two ways, either as the thing itself towards which it tends, for example a place or form, or a state of rest in that thing. Thus, in the movement of the appetite, the thing desired that terminates the movement of the appetite relatively, as a means by which something tends towards another, is called the useful. But that sought after as the last thing absolutely terminating the movement of the appetite, as a thing towards which for its own sake the appetite tends, is called the virtuous. For the virtuous is that which is desired for its own sake, but that which terminates the movement of the appetite in the form of the rest in the thing desired is called the pleasant. Reply to objection 1. Goodness, so far as it is identical with being, is divided by the 10 predicaments, but this division belongs to it according to its proper formality. Reply to objection 2. This division is not by opposite things, but by opposite aspects. Now, those things are called pleasing, which have no other formality under which they are desirable except the pleasant, being sometimes hurtful and contrary to virtue, whereas the useful applies to such as have nothing desirable in themselves, but are desired only as helpful to something further, as the taking of bitter medicine, while the virtuous is predicated of such as are desirable in themselves. Reply to objection 3. Goodness is not divided into these three as something univocal to be predicated equally of them all, but as something analogical to be predicated of them according to priority and posteriority. Hence it is predicated chiefly of the virtuous, then of the pleasant, and lastly of the useful. Question 6. The goodness of God. We next considered the goodness of God, under which head there are 4 points of inquiry: whether goodness belongs to God; 2. Whether God is the supreme good; 3. Whether he alone is essentially good; and 4. Whether all things are good by the divine goodness. Article 1. Objection 1. It seems that to be good does not belong to God, for goodness consists in mode, species, and order, but these do not seem to belong to God, since God is immense and is not ordered to anything else. Therefore, to be good does not belong to God. Objection 2. Further, the good is what all things desire, but all things do not desire God, because all things do not know him, and nothing is desired unless it is known. Therefore, to be good does not belong to God. On the contrary, it is written, Lamb 3:25, the Lord is good to them that hope in him, to the soul that seeketh him. I answer that to be good belongs preeminently to God, for a thing is good according to its desirableness. Now everything seeks after its own perfection, and the perfection and form of an efficient consists in a certain likeness to the agent, since every agent makes its like, and hence the agent itself is desirable and has the nature of good. For the very thing which is desirable in it is the participation of its likeness. Therefore, since God is the first effective cause of all things, it is manifest that the aspect of good and of desirableness belong to him, and hence Dionysius, Div. Nom. 4, attributes good to God as to the first efficient cause, saying that God is called good as by whom all things subsist. Reply to objection 1. To have mode, species, and order belongs to the essence of caused good, but good is in God as in its cause, and hence it belongs to him to impose mode, species, and order on others. Wherefore these three things are in God as in their cause. Reply to objection 2. All things, by desiring their own perfection, desire God himself, inasmuch as the perfections of all things are so many similitudes of the divine being, as appears from what is said above, question 4, article 3. And so of those things which desire God, some know him as he is himself, and this is proper to the rational creature. Others know some participation of his goodness, and this belongs also to sensible knowledge. Others have a natural desire without knowledge, as being directed to their ends by a higher intelligence. Article 2. Whether God is the supreme good. Objection 1. It seems that God is not the supreme good, for the supreme good adds something to good, otherwise it would belong to every good. But everything which is in addition to anything else is a compound thing. Therefore the supreme good is a compound, but God is supremely simple, as was shown above, question 3, article 7. Therefore God is not the supreme good. Objection 2. Further, good is what all desire, as the philosopher says, Ethic 1:1. Now, what all desire is nothing but God, who is the end of all things. Therefore there is no other good but God. This appears also from what is said, Luke 18:19, none is good but God alone. But we use the word supreme in comparison with others, as, for example, supreme heat is used in comparison with all other heats. Therefore God cannot be called the supreme good. Objection 3. Further, supreme implies comparison, but things not in the same genus are not comparable, as sweetness is not properly greater or less than a line. Therefore, since God is not in the same genus as other good things, as appears above, question 3, article 5, question 4, article 3, it seems that God cannot be called the supreme good in relation to others. On the contrary, Augustine says, De Trine 2, that the Trinity of the divine persons is the supreme good discerned by purified minds. I answer that God is the supreme good simply, and not only as existing in any genus or order of things, for good is attributed to God, as was said in the preceding article, inasmuch as all desired perfections flow from him as from the first cause. They do not, however, flow from him as from a univocal agent, as shown above, question 4, article 2, but as from an agent which does not agree with its effects either in species or genus. Now the likeness of an effect in the univocal cause is found uniformly, but in the equivocal cause it is found more excellently, as heat is in the sun more excellently than it is in fire. Therefore, as good is in God as in the fire, but not the univocal, the cause of all things, it must be in him in the most excellent way, and therefore he is called the supreme good. Reply to objection 1. The supreme good does not add to good any absolute being, but only a relation. Now a relation of God to creatures is not a reality in God, but in the creature, for it is in God in our idea only, as what is knowable is so called with relation to knowledge, not that it depends on knowledge, but because knowledge depends on it. Thus it is not necessary that there should be composition in the supreme good, but only that other things are deficient in comparison with it. Reply to objection 2. When we say that good is what all desire, it is not to be understood that every kind of good thing is desired by all, but that whatever is desired has the nature of good. And when it is said, none is good but God alone, this is to be understood of essential goodness, as will be explained in the next article. Reply to objection 3. Things not of the same genus are in no way comparable to each other, if indeed they are in different genera. Now we say that God is not in the same genus with other good things, not that he is in any other genus, but that he is outside genus, and is the principle of every genus, and thus he is compared to others by excess, and it is this kind of comparison the supreme good implies. Article 3. Whether to be essentially good belongs to God alone. Objection 1. It seems that to be essentially good does not belong to God alone, for as one is convertible with being, so is good, as we said above, question 5, article 1. But every being is one essentially, as appears from the philosopher Metaphysics 4. Therefore every being is good essentially. Objection 2. Further, if good is what all things desire, since being itself is desired by all, then the being of each thing is its good. But everything is a being essentially, therefore every being is good essentially. Objection 3. Further, everything is good by its own goodness. Therefore, if there is anything which is not good essentially, it is necessary to say that its goodness is not its own essence. Therefore, its goodness, since it is a being, must be good, and if it is good by some other goodness, the same question applies to that goodness. Also, therefore, we must either proceed to infinity, or come to some goodness which is not good by any other goodness. Therefore, the first supposition holds good. Therefore, everything is good essentially. On the contrary, Boethius says, De Hebdom, that all things but God are good by participation, therefore they are not good essentially. I answer that God alone is good essentially, for everything is called good according to its perfection. Now perfection of a thing is threefold. First, according to the constitution of its own being. Secondly, in respect of any accidents being added as necessary for its perfect operation. Thirdly, perfection consists in the attaining to something else as the end. Thus, for instance, the first perfection of fire consists in its existence, which it has through its own substantial form. Its secondary perfection consists in heat, lightness, and dryness, and the like. Its third perfection is to rest in its own place. This triple perfection belongs to no creature by its own essence. It belongs to God only, in whom alone essence is existence, in whom there are no accidents, since whatever belongs to others accidentally belongs to him essentially, as to be powerful, wise, and the like, as appears from what is stated above, question 3, article 6, and he is not directed to anything else as to an end, but is himself the last end of all things. Hence it is manifest that God alone has every kind of perfection by his own essence. Therefore, he himself alone is good essentially. Reply to objection 1. 1 does not include the idea of perfection, but only of indivision, which belongs to everything according to its own essence. Now the essences of simple things are undivided both actually and potentially, but the essences of compounds are undivided only actually, and therefore everything must be one essentially, but not good essentially, as was shown above. Reply to objection 2. Although everything is good in that it has being, yet the essence of a creature is not very being, and therefore it does not follow that a creature is good essentially. Reply to objection 3. The goodness of a creature is not its very essence, but something superadded. It is either its existence or some added perfection, or the order to its end. Still, the goodness itself thus added is good, just as it is being. But for this reason is it called being, because by it something has being, not because it itself has being through something else. Hence for this reason is it called good, because by it something is good, and not because it itself has some other goodness whereby it is good. Article 4. Whether all things are good by the divine goodness. Objection 1. It seems that all things are good by the divine goodness. For Augustine says, De Trine 8, this and that are good. Take away this and that, and see good itself if thou canst. And so thou shalt see God. Good not by any other good, but the good of every good. But everything is good by its own good. Therefore everything is good by that very good which is God. Objection 2. Further, as Boethius says, De Hebdom, all things are called good, accordingly as they are directed to God, and this is by reason of the divine goodness. Therefore all things are good by the divine goodness. On the contrary, all things are good, inasmuch as they have being, but they are not called beings through the divine being, but through their own being. Therefore all things are not good by the divine goodness, but by their own goodness. I answer that, as regards relative things, we must admit extrinsic denomination. As a thing is denominated place from place and measured from measure, but as regards absolute things, opinions differ. Plato held the existence of a separate Plato held the existence of separate ideas, question 84, article 4, of all things, and that individuals were denominated by them as participating in the separate ideas. For instance, that Socrates is called man according to the separate idea of man. Now, just as he laid down separate ideas of man and horse, which he called absolute man and absolute horse, so likewise he laid down separate ideas of being and of one, and these he called absolute being and absolute oneness, and by participation of these, everything was called being or one. And what was thus absolute being and absolute one, he said was the supreme good. And because good is convertible with being, as one is also, he called God the absolute good, from whom all things are called good by way of participation. Although this opinion appears to be unreasonable in affirming separate ideas of natural things as subsisting of themselves, as Aristotle argues in many ways, still, it is absolutely true that there is first something which is essentially being and essentially good, which we call God, as appears from what is shown above, question 2, article 3, and Aristotle agrees with this. Hence, from the first being, essentially such and good, everything can be called good and a being inasmuch as it participates in it by way of a certain assimilation, which is far removed and defective, as appears from the above. Question 4, article 3. Everything is therefore called good from the divine goodness, as from the first exemplary, effective, and final principle of all goodness. Nevertheless, everything is called good by reason of the similitude of the divine goodness belonging to it, which is formerly its own goodness, whereby it is denominated good. And so of all things there is one goodness, and yet many goodness. This is a sufficient reply to the objections. Question 7. The infinity of God. Prologue. After considering the divine perfection, we must consider the divine infinity and God's existence in things, for God is everywhere and in all things inasmuch as he is boundless and infinite. Concerning the first, there are 4 points of inquiry. 1. Whether God is infinite. 2. Whether anything besides him is infinite in essence. 3. Whether anything can be infinitude in magnitude. 4. Whether an infinite multitude can exist. Article 1. Whether God is infinite. Objection 1. It seems that God is not infinite, for everything infinite is imperfect, as the philosopher says, because it has parts and matter, as is said in Physics 3, but God is most perfect, therefore he is not infinite. Objection 2. Further, according to the philosopher Physics 1, finite and infinite belong to quantity, but there is no quantity in God, for he is not a body, as was shown above, question 3, article 1. Therefore it does not belong to him to be infinite. Objection 3. Further, what is here in such a way as not to be elsewhere is finite according to place. Therefore, that which is a thing in such a way as not to be another thing is finite according to substance. But God is this, and not another, for he is not a stone or wood. Therefore, God is not infinite in substance. On the contrary, Damascene says, De Fide Orth 1, Book 1, 4, that God is infinite and eternal and boundless. I answer that all the ancient philosophers attribute infinitude to the first principle, as is said Physics 3, and with reason, for they considered that things flow forth infinitely from the first principle. But because some erred concerning the nature of the first principle, as a consequence they erred also concerning its infinity. For as much as they asserted that matter was the first principle, consequently they attributed to the first principle a material infinity, to the effect that some infinite body was the first principle of things. We must consider, therefore, that a thing is called infinite because it is not finite. Now, matter is in a way made finite by form, and the form by matter. Matter indeed is made finite by form, inasmuch as matter, before it receives its form, is in potentiality to many forms, but on receiving a form it is terminated by that one. Again, form is made finite by matter, inasmuch as form, considered in itself, is common to many, but when received in matter, the form is determined to this one particular thing. Now matter is perfected by the form by which it is made finite. Therefore, infinite as attributed to matter has the nature of something imperfect, for it is as it were formless matter, On the other hand, form is not made perfect by matter, but rather is contracted by matter, and hence the infinite regarded on the part of the form not determined by matter has the nature of something perfect. Now being is the most formal of all things, as appears from what is shown above. Question 4, Article 1, Objection 3. Since therefore the divine being is not a being received in anything, but he is his own subsistent being, as was shown above. Question 3, Article 4. It is clear that God himself is infinite and perfect. From this appears the reply to the first objection. Reply to Objection 2. Quantity is terminated by its form, which can be seen in the fact that a figure which consists in quantity terminated is a kind of quantitative form. Hence the infinite of quantity is the infinite of matter. Such a kind of infinite cannot be attributed to God, as was said above in this article. Reply to Objection 3. The fact that the being of God is self-subsisting, not received in any other, and is thus called infinite, shows him to be distinguished from all other beings, and all others to be apart from him. Even so, were there such a thing as a self-subsisting whiteness, the very fact that it did not exist in anything else would make it distinct from every other whiteness existing in a subject. Article 2. Whether anything but God can be essentially infinite. Objection 1. It seems that something else besides God can be essentially infinite. For the power of anything is proportioned to its essence. Now, if the essence of God is infinite, his power must also be infinite. Therefore, he can produce an infinite effect, since the extent of a power is known by its effect. Objection 2. Further, whatever has infinite power has an infinite essence. Now, the created intellect has an infinite power, for it apprehends the universal, which can extend itself to an infinitude of singular things. Therefore, every created intellectual substance is infinite. Objection 3. Primary matter is something other than God, as was shown above, question 3, article 8. But primary matter is infinite, therefore something besides God can be infinite. On the contrary, the infinite cannot have a beginning, as said in Physics 3. But everything outside God is from God, as from its first principle. Therefore, besides God, nothing can be infinite. I answer that things other than God can be relatively infinite, but not absolutely infinite. For with regard to infinite as applied to matter, it is manifest that everything actually existing possesses a form, and thus its matter is determined by form. But because matter, considered as existing under some substantial form, remains in potentiality to many accidental forms, which is absolutely finite, can be relatively infinite, as, for example, what is finite according to its own form, but still it is relatively infinite inasmuch as it is in potentiality to an infinite number of shapes. But if we speak of the infinite in reference to form, it is manifest that those things, the forms of which are in matter, are absolutely finite, and in no way infinite. If, however, any created forms are not received into matter, but are self-subsisting, as some think is the case with angels, these will be relatively infinite, inasmuch as such kinds of forms are not terminated nor contracted by any matter. But because a created form thus subsisting has being, and yet is not its own being, it follows that its being is received and contracted to a determinate nature. Hence, it cannot be absolutely infinite. Reply to Objection 1. It is against the nature of a made thing for its essence to be its existence, because subsisting being is not a created being. Hence, it is against the nature of a made thing to be absolutely infinite. Therefore, as God, although he has infinite power, cannot make a thing to be not made, for this would imply that two contradictories are true at the same time. So likewise, he cannot make anything to be absolutely infinite. Reply to Objection 2. The fact that the power of the intellect extends itself in a way to infinite things is because the intellect is a form not in matter, but either wholly or wholly separated from matter. as is the angelic substance, or at least an intellectual power, which is not the act of any organ in the intellectual soul joined to a body. Reply to objection 3. Primary matter does not exist by itself in nature, since it is not actually being, but potentially only. Hence, it is something concreted rather than created. Nevertheless, primary matter, even as a potentiality, is not absolutely infinite, but relatively, because its potentiality extends only to natural forms. Article 3. Whether an actually infinite magnitude can exist. Objection 1. It seems that there can be something actually infinite in magnitude, for in mathematics there is no error, since there is no lie in things abstract, as the philosopher says, Physics 2. But mathematics uses the infinite in magnitude, thus the geometrician in his demonstrations says, let this line be infinite. Therefore, it is not impossible for a thing to be infinite in magnitude. Objection 2. Further, what is not against the nature of anything can agree with it. Now, to be infinite is not against the nature of magnitude, but rather both the finite and the infinite seem to be properties of quantity. Therefore, it is not impossible for some magnitude to be infinite. Objection 3. Further, magnitude is infinitely divisible, for the continuous is defined that which is infinitely divisible, as is clear from Physics 3. But contraries are concerned about one and the same thing. Since therefore addition is opposed to division, and increase opposed to diminution, it appears that magnitude can be increased to infinity. Therefore, it is possible for magnitude to be infinite. Objection 4. Further, movement and time have quantity, and continuity derived from the magnitude over which movement passes, as is said in Physics 4. But it is not against the nature of time and movement to be infinite, since every determinate indivisible in time and circular movement is both a beginning and an end. Therefore, neither is it against the nature of magnitude to be infinite. On the contrary, every body has a surface, but every body which has a surface is finite, because surface is the term of a finite body. Therefore, all bodies are finite. The same applies both to surface and to a line. Therefore, nothing is infinite in magnitude. I answer that it is one thing to be infinite in essence, and another to be infinite in magnitude. For granted that a body exists infinite in magnitude, as fire or air, yet this cannot be infinite in essence, because its essence would be terminated in a species by its form, and confined to individuality by matter. And so, assuming from these premises that no creature is infinite in essence, it still remains to inquire whether any creature can be infinite in magnitude. We must therefore observe that a body, which is a complete magnitude, can be considered in two ways: mathematically, in respect to its quantity only, and naturally, as regards its matter and form. Now, it is manifest that a natural body cannot be actually infinite, for every natural body has some determined substantial form. Since therefore the accidents follow upon the substantial form, it is necessary that determinate accidents should follow upon a determinate form, and among these accidents is quantity, so every natural body has a greater or smaller determinate quantity. Hence, it is impossible for a natural body to be infinite. The same appears from movement, because every natural body has some natural movement, whereas an infinite body cannot have any natural movement, neither direct, because nothing moves naturally by a direct movement unless it is out of its place, and this cannot happen to an infinite body, for it would occupy every place, and thus every place would be indifferently in its own place. Neither could it move circularly, for as much as circular motion requires that one part of the body is necessarily transferred to a place occupied by another part, and this cannot happen as regards an infinite circular body. For if two lines can be drawn from the center, the farther they extend from the center, the farther they are from each other. Therefore, if a body were infinite, the lines would be infinitely distant from each other, and thus one can never occupy this place belonging to any other. The same applies to a mathematical body, for if we imagine a mathematical body actually existing, we must imagine it under some form, because nothing is actual except by its form. Hence, since the form of quantity as such is figure, such a body must have some figure, and so would be finite, for figure is confined by a term or boundary. Reply to objection 1. A geometrician does not need to assume a line actually infinite, but takes some actually finite line, from which he subtracts whatever he finds necessary, which line he calls infinite. Reply to objection 2. Although the infinite is not against the nature of magnitude in general, still it is against the nature of any species of it. Thus, for instance, it is against the nature of bicubical or tricubical magnitude, whether circular or triangular, and so on. Now, what is not possible in any species cannot exist in the genus. Hence, there cannot be any infinite magnitude, since no species of magnitude is infinite. Reply to objection 3. The infinite in quantity, as was shown above, belongs to matter. Now, by division of the whole, we approach to matter. For as much as parts have the aspect of matter, but by addition we approach to the whole, which has the aspect of a form. Therefore, the infinite is not in the addition of magnitude, but only in division. Reply to objection 4. Movement and time are whole, not actually, but successively. Hence, they have potentiality mixed with actuality, but magnitude is an actual whole. Therefore, the infinite in quantity refers to matter, and does not agree with the totality of magnitude, yet agrees with the totality of time and movement, for it is proper to matter to be in potentiality. Article 4. Whether an infinite multitude can exist. Objection 1. It seems that an actually infinite multitude is possible, for it is not impossible for a potentiality to be made actual, but number can be multiplied to infinity. Therefore, it is possible for an infinite multitude to actually exist. Objection 2. Further, it is possible for any individual of any species to be made actual, but the species of figures are infinite. Therefore, an infinite number of actual figures is possible. Objection 3. Further, things not opposed to each other do not obstruct each other. But supposing a multitude of things to exist, there can still be many others not opposed to them. Therefore, it is not impossible for others also to coexist with them, and so on to infinitude. Therefore, an actual infinite number of things is possible. On the contrary, it is written, Thou hast ordered all things in measure and number and weight. Wisdom 11:21. I answer that a twofold opinion exists on this subject. Some, as Avicenna and Algazel, said that it was impossible for an actually infinite multitude to exist absolutely, but that an accidentally infinite multitude was not impossible. A multitude is said to be infinite absolutely when an infinite multitude is necessary that something may exist. Now this is impossible because it would entail something dependent on an infinity for its existence, and hence its generation can never come to be, because it is impossible to pass through an infinite medium. A multitude is said to be accidentally infinite when its existence as such is not necessary but accidental. This can be shown, for example, in the work of a carpenter requiring a certain absolute multitude, namely art in the soul, the movement of the hand, and a hammer. And supposing that such things were infinitely multiplied, the carpentering work would never be finished, forasmuch as it would depend on an infinite number of causes. But the multitude of hammers, inasmuch as one may be broken and another used, is an accidental multitude. For it happens by accident that many hammers are used, and it matters little whether one or two or many are used, or an infinite number, if the work is carried on for an infinite time. In this way they said that there can be an accidentally infinite multitude. This, however, is impossible, since every kind of multitude must belong to a species of multitude. Now the species of multitude are to be reckoned by the species of numbers, but no species of number is infinite, for every number is multitude measured by one. Hence it is impossible for there to be an actually infinite multitude, either absolute or accidental. Likewise, multitude in nature is created, and everything created is comprehended under some clear intention of the Creator, for no agent acts aimlessly. Hence, everything created must be comprehended in a certain number. Therefore, it is impossible for an actually infinite multitude to exist, even accidentally, but a potentially infinite multitude is possible, because the increase of multitude follows upon the division of magnitude, since the more a thing is divided, the greater number of things result. Hence, as the infinite is to be found potentially in the division of the continuous, because we thus approach matter, as was shown in the preceding article by the same rule, the infinite can be also found potentially in the addition of multitude. Reply to objection 1. Every potentiality is made actual according to its mode of being. For instance, a day is reduced to act successively and not at all at once. Likewise, the infinite in multitude is reduced to act successively and not at all at once, because I think I repeated. It's the same. Because every multitude can be succeeded by another multitude to infinity. Reply to objection 2. Species of figures are infinite by infinitude of number. Now there are various species of figures such as trilateral, quadrilateral, and so on. And as an infinitely numerable multitude is not at all at once reduced to act, so neither is the multitude of figures. Reply to objection 3. Although the supposition of some things does not preclude the supposition of others, still the supposition of an infinite number is opposed to any single species of multitude. Hence, it is not possible for an actually infinite multitude to exist.